Today's passage is from the book of John, chapter 1, verses 6 through 23. John 1, 6 through 23. There came a man who was sent from God. His name was John. He came as a witness to testify concerning that light, so that through him all men might believe. He himself was not the light. He came only as a witness to the light. The true light that gives light to every man was coming into the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who received him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision or a husband's will, but born of God. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. John testifies concerning him. He cries out, saying, "This was he of whom I said, 'He who comes after me has surpassed me, because he was before me.' From the fullness of his grace we have received one blessing after another. For the law was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God, the God, the one and only, who is at the Father's side, has made him known." Now this was John's testimony when the Jews of Jerusalem sent priests and Levites to ask him who he was. He did not fail to confess, but confessed freely, "I am not the Christ." They asked, "Then who are you? Are you Elijah?" He said, "I am not." "Are you the prophet?" He answered, "No." Finally they said, "Who are you? Give us an answer to take back to those who sent us. What do you say about yourself?" John replied in the words of Isaiah the prophet, "I am the voice of one calling in the desert, make straight the way of the Lord." As a society, we are kind of obsessed with being first. I don't mean being first in like a sporting event, though we're definitely obsessed with that. But I mean, who came first? Who was the first person to walk on the moon? Who was the first person to get up Mount Everest? Who was the first person to make it to the North Pole? This week, I found a list of some more unusual examples of the first, and I want to share a few of them with you. The first person to get a perfect score in Pac-Man was a guy named Billy Mitchell in 1999. I don't know where you could get a perfect score in Pac-Man. The first video game, by the way, ever played was in 1947. It was what's called a cathode tube ray entertainment device, and it was a missile defense game. The first flash mob ever was in 2003 in a shop in New York. It started as a paid publicity stunt. The first road map was developed in 5 BC by Augustus Caesar. It took 20 years to complete it. The first labor strike happened in 1153 BC in Egypt. The guys working on the pyramids went on strike against Ramses II. The first aerial attack in war happened before there were airplanes. It took place in 1849. Austria was attacking Venice, Italy, and they put bombs in hot air balloons. The wind went the wrong way and the entire squadron was blown out to sea. The first joke. The first joke dates back to 2000 BC. It was carved into a stone tablet in Samaria. This is, and I am not making this up, this is the oldest joke known to man. It goes, "This has not been known from time immemorial. A wife who did not fart in her husband's lap." We have apparently liked fart jokes from the beginning of time. I tell you all this because today I want to talk about another first. I want to talk about the first Christian. Today we're going to talk about John the Baptist, and I think in a very real way, John could be considered the first Christian. He was the first follower of Christ. He was a follower of Christ before he met Jesus. And so today I want to talk a little about John the Baptist and what made him stand out for the society around him. I'll tell you right off what I think is the defining characteristic of John the Baptist. This first Christian did not put himself first. John began his ministry in a difficult time. Phonies and religious hypocrites were everywhere. He began his ministry in a nation divided by sex and self-interest. There were the good Roman citizens. They were the followers of Herod. They wanted to bring Israel to the forefront of the Roman Empire. And he didn't do that by holding on to antiquated ideas of God and that there's a right and a wrong way to live. These people worshipped multiculturalism. And they went beyond just respecting those who are different. We should do that. We should respect people and show them kindness even when they disagree with us. But these people made multiculturalism into a religion. The only thing they couldn't stand was the idea of someone saying there really is just one God who cares about how we live. These people were not happy with John's message. Eventually it was Herod who had John arrested and beheaded. And there were the Sadducees, the elitists. These were the priests who took care of the temple. They were well-educated, wealthy, and affluent, and they looked down their nose at anyone who was not. John was the antithesis of everything these guys stood for. John lived in the wilderness. He was a poor man from an unimportant family. And the fact that the common people followed John made him seem all the more unseemly to the Sadducees. And then there were the Pharisees, the hypocrites. They probably had the best theology of the day. They talked about faith and honoring God's holiness, but it was all just talk. They didn't really care about God. They cared that people thought that they cared about God. They wanted honor and prestige from the people, not a relationship with the living God. And in contrast to all of that, we have John the Baptist. John the Baptist stood out as someone who did not put himself first. Surrounded by self-interest and hypocrisy, John sought the Lord. And he did not put himself first. He did not focus on his own glory. Lots of other people tried to focus on John's glory. People kept asking him if he was the Christ, and John had to repeatedly and explicitly say, I am not the Christ. Rather, John said that it would be one who would come after him who was greater than him. And so people tried to give him other glorious titles if he wasn't the Christ. They said, are you Elijah? In the book of Malachi, God had promised that he would send back Elijah to the people before the great and terrible day of the Lord. And in Jewish society at that time, being identified as Elijah, returned from heaven, is probably the second highest title they could receive after being the Messiah. But John denied it. He said he was not Elijah. Later, Jesus would say that John filled the role of Elijah, but John didn't claim that title for himself. So people tried a third time they said, are you the prophet? Notice they did not say, are you a prophet? They asked, are you the prophet? It's a reference to the book of Deuteronomy. God promised one day to raise up a prophet like Moses who would speak for the Lord and give the people God's law. And the people asked, are you this prophet? Again, John said, no, this wasn't him. There was someone coming. The true prophet who would speak for God in a way no one else ever had was coming. But it wasn't John. So finally the people said, well, who are you? What do you say about yourself? John responded by quoting the book of Isaiah. He said he is the one, the voice calling in the desert. Calling out, make straight the ways of the Lord. That's a common idea in the ancient world. Roads were still a relatively new idea. Most of what people called roads were just places where folks had walked enough to kill the grass and stomp down the dirt. And that was fine for normal people. But if a king wanted to go somewhere, he expected a real road. And most kings employed a guy whose only job was to find out where the king wanted to go and make sure there was a road so he could get there. That's how John identified himself. It might not be as glamorous of a title, but John said that he was the one who would prepare the road. He was the one who would make a way for the coming of the king. John lived in a world filled with self-interest. But John didn't put himself first. And I think in many ways our society today is a lot like the one John lived in. That is, we are surrounded by elitists and hypocrites and people who want to worship multiculturalism and turn it into a religion. And I think like John, we can choose to stand out, to be different from the society around us. In 2007, Rick Warren, the pastor of Saddleback Church in California, wrote the book, The Purpose-Driven Life. It quickly became one of the best-selling devotionals ever written. And Warren opens his book with a shocking statement. The first 4 words of Warren's book about a purpose-driven life are, it's not about you. That's a hard message for our society to hear. I've, over the years, seen several ways that the secular world has responded to that line. And the most common response I've seen from the unbelieving world is to say, he can't mean that. It's a fake, it's a trick, it's out of context. If we keep reading, we'll find out that he can't really mean that. I remember once reading a review of this book where the reviewer said, Warren opens with the words, it's not about you, it's about you and God. Or I've heard people say it's about your relationship with God, it's about what you will do in God, but somehow or another, you've got to be in there. Because there's no way that Warren could really mean my life isn't about me. But that's exactly what Warren wrote. We look at the entire context of the passage. Warren opened his book by saying, it's not about you. It's not about your peace of mind, your personal fulfillment, or even your happiness. It's not about your career or your family or even your wildest dreams and ambitions. If you want to know the purpose of your life, it has to begin with God. You are here by his purpose and for his purpose. I think this really describes John. John did not make his life all about himself. He did not put himself first. Instead, John pointed the way to Christ. He refused the honor of this world and instead said there is one coming who is greater than him. And I think we can still make a choice to live that way today. But how do we do this? In a practical sense, how do we live lives where we aren't simply putting ourselves first? First, I want to say what this does not mean. It does not mean that we just don't care for ourselves. It is sometimes I think people will hear that we should not put ourselves first, and I think that means we should put ourselves last. That we care for everybody else, and then, if there's some time left over, maybe I'll take care of myself. That's not what I'm saying here. First off, that's not practical. If we're not taking basic care of ourselves, we're not going to be able to care for anybody else. More than that, it's not what Jesus commanded us. When someone asked Jesus what the greatest commandments are, he said, first, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, strength, and soul. And the second is like it, to love your neighbor as yourself. But notice that Jesus did not say love your neighbor better than yourself. He said love your neighbor as you love yourself. And that means we need to love ourselves. We need to care for ourselves. We need to consider what we need for our lives, and then we need to treat our neighbor the same way. We don't love our neighbor better than ourselves. We love our neighbor as we love ourselves. All right, again, so how do we do that? How do we live a life where we aren't simply putting ourselves first? I'm reminded of the movie Field of Dreams. I hope everyone's seen that movie. After Hoosiers, it's probably the second greatest sports film ever made. If you haven't seen it, plug your ears. I'm going to spoil a lot of it for you. In that movie, a guy named Ray Kinsella, played by Kevin Costner, heard the famous line, "Build it and he will come." And so Ray tore up part of his cornfield and built a baseball stadium. And then the ghost of Shoeless Joe Jackson and a few other baseball players showed up. And throughout this movie, Ray took a lot of risks with his family's financial security. And after a while, he began to feel taken advantage of. Near the end of the movie, he found out that one of the other characters would basically get to go visit heaven, and he was not invited. And when he found that out, Ray finally just lost his temper. And he shouted, "I've done everything that was asked for me. I didn't understand it, but I did it. And not once did I ask, what's in it for me? So now, I'm asking, what's in it for me?" In response to that, Shoeless Joe Jackson said, "Is that why you did this, Ray? For you?" Now, I'm not actually knocking Ray's attitude, not really. Because I've been there a lot of my life. I'm there a lot right now. I have that part of me that still says, what's in it for me? I think most of us have that voice in us. I've spoken to Christians who are far more mature in the faith than I am, who said they continue to struggle with this idea of what's in it for me. But if we want to live lives where we don't simply put ourselves first, a big part of that is that we stop asking the question, what's in it for me? When that question arises in us, and it will arise in each of us, we seek to replace that with a different question. Instead of asking, what's in it for me, we ask, does this point people to Christ? Does this bring hope and joy to people? Is this showing compassion? Now, this isn't easy. Anytime we try to stop putting ourselves first, we're going to struggle with it. And I don't want to make you think that we don't gain anything from this. A moment ago, I mentioned the scene from Field of Dreams. And if you remember that movie, then you might remember what came next. Ray said, what's in it for me? But a moment later, we find out that nearly everything that had happened had been done for him. I'm going to leave a little mystery just in case you haven't seen the movie, but really, if what comes next in that movie didn't just hit you in the gut, there's something wrong with you. But I think that's all. Now, I recognize this is a movie, but it also speaks to a truth about life. Our God gives generously when we stop asking, what's in it for me? Our God doesn't give the things of this world. The stuff of this world was made to pass away. What our God gives are the fruit of the Spirit. He gives us faith, joy, love, patience, perseverance, goodness, kindness, self-control. These are the gifts of our God. These are the things the world cannot purchase. And they're all what God offers us right now. But it doesn't come from asking, what's in it for me? Because the more time I spend asking, what's in it for me, the less I will have the love and faith and joy of the Lord in my life. When I stop asking, what's in it for me? When I start saying, does this point people to Christ? That's when the Spirit of God is active in my life. Here's my closing thought for today. Jesus said, the last shall be first, and the first shall be last. When I want to make myself first in the things of this world, I am last in the gifts of the Spirit. when I stop trying to put myself first, then God gives generously of his gifts. When I stop saying what's in it for me, when I stop trying to make my life about putting me first. In a moment, we're going to stand for our invitation hymn. As we stand to sing, if you're looking at your life and you're saying, I've just been asking what's in it for me, I want to look beyond that. I want to see more than just a life trying to put myself first. You have an opportunity today. I ask you'll stand with me now for our invitation hymn, which is number 176, Lead Me to Calvary.